I met Gwen on my first day of work. She was the receptionist and the person who gave me a temporary pass and told me where to report. To say I was enchanted by the raven-haired beauty with deep blue eyes is a vast understatement. On the other hand, to say I was enchanted by her would be closer to the truth. I noticed there was no ring on her finger. As I stepped away from her table, I had already decided that I was going to try to have a relationship with her. Easier said than done. A hottie like Gwen had to be hit on all the time. She had hundreds of guys to choose from. I'd be one of the hundreds, and I didn't have anything special. I didn't consider myself bad-looking, and I was in pretty good physical shape. Playing sports in high school and college had gotten me in pretty good shape, and when I saw the chubby and even very fat former soccer players among the alumni at games, I promised myself I would never be like that. After graduation, I joined a gym and worked out regularly, but I was still just one of many, and after being turned down 7 times when I tried to get Gwen to date me, I balked. Ironically, it was the fact that Gwen had unsubscribed from me that helped us meet. Gwen was used to guys hitting on her, and while she turned many of them down, she was used to them not stopping trying. Apparently, I didn't realize that. I didn't stay in the program. I tried, accomplished nothing, and left. Obviously, that was not the way to deal with Gwen. About 2 months after my 7th attempt to get a date, accomplishing nothing and walking away, I noticed that Gwen started acting a little kinder to me, smiling more often, and even engaging in brief conversations. I didn't realize that these were signals being sent to me to bring me back into her orbit like everyone else. Not recognizing them, or perhaps subconsciously knowing but not wanting to be part of the crowd, I ignored them. When I ignored or failed to notice her signals, Gwen stepped up her game. She began joining me in the break room when I took breaks at 10 and 2 o'clock. Since she was very nice to look at, I've already mentioned she's a beauty, right? I enjoyed her company and didn't turn her down when she started joining me for lunch in the company cafeteria. I wasn't at all opposed to having a gorgeous woman staring at me during lunch or a break at work, and I didn't bother to ask about the reason for her sudden interest. I also made no move to ask her out, although she made a few small hints to me that she might be open to an invitation. For about a month, it was business as usual, and then one Wednesday afternoon during a 2-hour break, she did something I in no way expected. Gwen asked me out on a date. Well, maybe not a real date. She needed an escort for a family function. From what I understood from her story, there would be a few people there that she wanted to avoid, but if she came alone, she couldn't. And if she was with someone under her arm, they would stay away from her. At first, this seemed a little suspicious to me, but then I thought maybe it wasn't. Maybe there would be an old man or two there, and she wouldn't want anything to do with them. Either way, I wasn't going to turn her down. It might not be a real date, but I'd be spending time with the most gorgeous woman I'd ever met. The family celebration was an engagement party for my older brother and his fiancée, so there were both family and friends there. I was introduced to Gwen, and she stayed by my side most of the time we were there. I figured I was right when I assumed there would be an old boyfriend or two there that she wanted to avoid, because I saw at least 3 who looked at me like they wanted me to hurt them. Most likely they were her brother's friends that she was dating. This thought was further reinforced when I saw one of the 3 approach her brother for a brief conversation, and a few minutes later her brother came over and asked if he could borrow Gwen for a few minutes. Gwen also saw the guy talking to her brother and said, "You don't want me to ruin your party, do you? If that jerk comes near me, I'll make such a scene you'll remember it until the day you die." Tony, her brother, gave her a long look and then turned and walked away. We chatted and Gwen was never more than 2 meters away from me. I met my bride-to-be and was instantly smitten. If she wasn't already taken, I would have tried to get a glimpse of her myself. She was the complete opposite of Gwen. Gwen was tall, sultry, and Alice was 5'1" or 5'2" and had the fresh look of a girl from the neighbor's yard. I think Gwen noticed this attraction and, to distract me from Alice, tugged on my sleeve and said she wanted me to meet someone. She led me over to a large older man in his 50s with a big white mustache that looked like a walrus mustache. As we approached him, he said, "No, what have you got, princess? Another fly caught in your web?" "Just a good friend, Uncle Dan." She introduced us, and he smiled and said, "Careful, kid. She can be very bossy when she really gets turned on." Then I guess I'm already screwed, especially if she's not turned on yet. I'm not sure I can handle the way she is now. I can't even imagine her actually winding up. He laughed and said, "Then I'd advise you to run right now, kid. Get away from her. I should have known better than to introduce you to him. I lose more boyfriends that way. Boyfriend? I was a guy now? We talked for a few minutes and then my body signaled it was time to find a bathroom. Uncle Dan told me where it was, and for the first time since we'd arrived, Gwen and I separated. I figured she would be fine with her uncle until I got back to their place. I went to the bathroom, and when I came out, there was a guy standing there who wanted to use the bathroom next. As I walked past him, he said, "You're the guy who was here with Gwen, right?" I nodded affirmatively and he said, "Be careful, kid, don't trust her." And then he disappeared into the bathroom and closed the door. Gwen and Uncle Dan were gone and I went in search of her. I ran into Alice and asked her if she had seen Gwen, and she told me that she had last seen Gwen talking to Gary at the door to the garage. Then she said, "Gwen is a great girl, Bob, but she needs a strong hand. Keep that in mind if you find yourself paired up." I was about to ask her for an explanation, but another guest came up to ask her something, and I resumed my search for Gwen. I headed for the door in the kitchen that led to the attached garage. I didn't find Gwen there, but I heard a voice in the garage that sounded like Gwen's. I opened the door and saw Gwen and a guy who I realized was Gary. It was the same guy I had seen earlier talking to Tony before Tony came over and asked if he could borrow Gwen. He pinned her against the fender of the car, put his hands on her arms and held her there. And I said, "What's going on here?" "None of your business. Get out of here and leave us alone," the guy said. "It is my business," I replied. "She's my companion and it's my business. Now get your hands off and get away from her." "Screw you," he said, and that wasn't what I had to say at all. I headed toward him, and he turned, got into some kind of fighting stance, and launched his foot at me. Those things can work if you're faster than a bullet, and he wasn't. I kicked him hard in the face with my right foot. He folded in half on the floor, and I grabbed Gwen and said, "Come on, let's get out of here." We walked out of the garage, and Gwen said, "Thanks. If you hadn't shown up, I would have started screaming, and the party would have been ruined." Who was that asshole? An ex-boyfriend who didn't like being dumped. I dumped him because he was a jerk. Or maybe he was always a jerk and I just didn't notice it. We'd better go. When Gary gets back on his feet, he can come after us. I don't need a scene to ruin Alice's party. We found Alice and Tony on the terrace, said our goodbyes, and left. It was still quite early, and I asked Gwen if she wanted to do anything for the rest of the day. She said she was open to suggestions, and I asked if she liked country western music, and she said she did. So I took her to dinner at Santiago's and then to Buckskin's to listen to music and maybe dance. The band Without a Net was playing that night, and it was a pretty decent band. Gwen knew most of the dances, and we had a good time. I had to use the men's room, and while I was gone, the band started a number that was appropriate for a cowboy cha-cha-cha. The cowboy cha-cha-cha is a dance that can be danced as a couple or solo. When I got back to our table, I noticed Gwen on the floor doing the dance solo. I couldn't take my eyes off her as she leaned, swayed, and turned. Her beautiful dark mane fluttered as she moved to the music. Never in my life had I wanted anything as badly as I did now. Yes, I wanted her, but deep down I knew I could never possess her the way I wanted to. I knew, absolutely knew, that I would never be enough for Gwen. She was too much woman for one man. The tune ended, and as she walked back to our table, I noticed that all the male eyes in the place were on her as she walked toward me. Yes, I wanted her, but I knew I couldn't keep her. I didn't believe any of the men could, but that didn't kill the desire. We closed the establishment and I drove her home. On the way, she said she hadn't had this much fun in a long time and thanked me for the evening. When I got her to my house, she kissed me and thanked me again for the evening. As I drove home, I wondered why the gods make such a mockery of humans. They knew that a girl like Gwen couldn't stop at one man, but they kept putting her in front of men who couldn't resist her. Men like me. I also thought of Uncle Dan, Alice, and the man who met me coming out of the bathroom at the engagement party. They all told me to be careful, very careful with Gwen. I went to bed that night determined to heed their warnings. Monday morning when I arrived at work, Gwen greeted me with a smile and a cheerful, "Good morning." I responded with a kind word and headed to my office. Gwen joined me during the 10 and 2 o'clock breaks, but our conversations were general in nature. On Tuesday and Wednesday, she joined me for lunch in both breaks, but I never did what she expected. I never asked her out on a date. I wanted to, God knows I wanted to, but I knew I wouldn't like Gwen, so I never made a move. On Thursday, Gwen didn't smile at me when I got to work, nor did she join me for a break or lunch. On Friday, not only did I not smile, I barely acknowledged her. She looked up when I walked in, saw it was me, and lowered her gaze again. Needless to say, she didn't join me for lunch or recess. On Monday, I got to the office before her, so I was spared a chilly reception. On my morning break at 10 o'clock, I was sitting at my desk in the break room when Gwen walked in. When she saw me, she hesitated for a second or two, headed in my direction, and then abruptly changed direction and headed for an empty desk at the other end of the room. She sat to the side of me, so I didn't look in her direction, but I could feel her gaze on me the whole time I was there. When it was time for lunch and the afternoon break, I left the office, but the next day when I arrived at work, Gwen smiled at me and wished me a good morning. I responded to the greeting and then went to my office and took care of the business I had in my in-basket. I worked until the morning break, and at noon, I decided to have lunch at a diner on a nearby street. The waitress was just bringing my order when I saw Gwen enter. She looked around the crowded place and saw that the only empty seat was my table. She came over and asked if she could join me, and of course I agreed. The waitress came over and took Gwen's order, and I, not wanting to be rude, didn't eat until her order arrived. While we waited, we talked, mostly about work and some people, but as soon as the waitress came over with Gwen's food, Gwen asked, "Why don't you like me?" This caught me off guard. "What makes you think I don't like you?" "You don't ask me out on dates." "That's not true, Gwen. I've asked you out more than half a dozen times and you've turned me down every time. Since you clearly weren't interested, I stopped asking you out. On the day of the engagement, when you drove me home, I told you I hadn't had this much fun in a long time and kissed you as you walked me to the door. That was girl talk, call me. I want to do it again, but you've never done anything since. My bad, but in my defense, I don't know foreign languages." "Foreign languages?" "I don't speak or understand girl speech." "Then I guess I'll have to teach you. Have you anything for tonight?" "Nothing I can't get away from. If you want, you can have your first lesson tonight." I looked at Gwen and wondered what the hell was going on. I wasn't anything special and she was. Why was she hitting on me? Maybe I wasn't anything special, but I wasn't stupid and I wouldn't pass up a chance to be with Gwen for anything in the world. "What time is it?" I asked. "6 will suit you?" "Will do." When I arrived to pick her up, she was dressed in jeans and a tasseled t-shirt. And as soon as I saw her outfit, she said, "I bet you can guess what I want to do." I felt ridiculous standing in front of her in a suit and tie, but that was fixable. I had a gym bag in the car that held a sweatshirt I could change into. Compared to Gwen, I looked a little clumsy, but it couldn't be helped. We went back to Buckskins and had a great time. There were free dance lessons at Buckskins on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and that night's lesson was on West Coast Swing, which neither of us knew, and we had a great time learning it. The lessons lasted from 7 to 9, with a 10-minute break in between, and during the breaks we sat at a table, sipped drinks, and talked, mostly about learning more about each other. I learned that she has 2 brothers and 1 sister. She has a 2-year associate's degree in business administration and was working as a secretary while she looked for something better. Her favorite color was red. She loved soccer. Her favorite team was the Denver Broncos. Baseball, Detroit Tigers, but had no interest at all in basketball, hockey, or soccer. She liked classical music, bluegrass, Dixieland, jazz, and the golden oldies, and couldn't stand rap, hip-hop, heavy metal, or hard rock. She preferred action movies to posh movies, and her favorite pastime was forays to the shooting range with her Llama .380 handgun. All in all, she was my type. As I walked her to the door, she turned and kissed me and then said, "What did I just say to you? What do you want me to call?" "You got an A on your first test paper. I'll teach you to understand girl talk in no time." As I drove toward home, my mind was at war with itself. Half of it wanted me to cling to Gwen and hold her, but the other half of it was telling me to stay away from her and avoid getting hurt. I listened to the part that was telling me to hold on. For the next 2 months, Gwen and I saw each other 1 to 3 times a week. During those 2 months, Gwen found a better job, and I stopped seeing her every day for breaks and lunches. I didn't like her new job very much because sometimes she had to work late, which disrupted our visits with her. I finally got to the point where I wanted to take the relationship to the next level and started shopping for a ring. But before I found one I liked, things went south. It was Thursday, and I had an evening date with Gwen. Or rather, I had until she called me at work and told me she was running late. I didn't feel like sitting home alone, so I decided to stop by Buckskin's to see if there would be dance lessons with someone I didn't know. While I was there, I would have a drink or two, and I don't like to drink on an empty stomach, so I decided to stop somewhere and get something to eat. When I made this decision, I was driving through Claremont and saw a sign that said, Angelo's Fine Italian Dining, and I decided to give it a try. The first thing I saw when I walked in the door was Gwen sitting in a booth with a strange man, not across from him, but next to him. His left hand was resting on the table, and she was holding his with her right. They smiled at each other, and I turned around, headed to my car, got in it, and drove out of the parking lot, all thoughts of Buckskins gone. I would have had something to drink there between classes, but I wasn't in the mood for drinks anymore. I pointed the car toward Bud's, a bar where I could get something serious to drink. As I drove, I told myself that I knew from the beginning that Gwen wasn't the kind of girl I could keep. When I arrived at the Bud, I took a table in the back room and settled in to drown my sorrow. As I drank, I wondered if Gwen was working late and if all of our thwarted dates were the result of her seeing another guy or guys. I'd had more to drink than I should have, but I was still sane enough to hand Mike my car keys and ask him to call me a cab. Okay, he said, you're a cab, and then laughed and picked up the phone. The cab dropped me off at my house and I collapsed into bed. I had a headache in the morning, but I knew I would as I poured myself a drink at Bud's. A handful of aspirin and a few cups of black coffee got me in shape enough to get to work. Fortunately, I'd had a busy day, and by focusing on work, I was able to push Gwen to the back of my mind until I was fired. However, she was back at the forefront of my thoughts when I came home from work this afternoon. She returned in full force when I had to call a cab to take me to Bud's to get my car. That call reminded me of why my car ended up at Bud's. I took the keys from Mike, drank my beer, and drove off. I couldn't afford to revel in my grief. The cab ride home last night, the cab ride to work this morning, the cab ride to Bud's to pick up the car, plus what I had spent on booze the night before, had all taken up a lot of my spare cash. On the drive home from Bud's, I reflected on the situation and wondered why I had let her drive me to this state. I knew from the beginning that Gwen and I weren't right for each other. I was lucky to get what little I had from her. In the back of my mind, I knew it had to end someday, and now it had. It was time to move on. I packed up all my camping gear and headed to Lake Martin. I spent the weekend working on my tan and communing with nature. When I got home Sunday night, the red light on my answering machine was flashing. The meter showed I had 9 messages. 8 were from Gwen, and I deleted them as soon as I heard her voice. I didn't need to hear what she was saying, and the sooner I could put her in the past, the better. One was from some guy who wanted me to endorse him for city council. I deleted that one too. The day went by quickly, and when I got home, the red light was flashing again. 4 messages, 3 from Gwen, and 1 unexpected. I wondered why Gwen was calling my home phone and not my cell phone, and glancing at it, I found it turned off. I had forgotten that I had turned it off when I left for the lake and had forgotten to turn it back on. Upon reflection, I decided that was probably a good thing. Otherwise, it might have been constantly tripped while I was trying to enjoy the weekend. I decided not to turn it back on until morning. Back to the ringing, which was a big surprise. Nothing fancy, just call me, followed by a phone number. I recognized the voice and I suddenly had to make a different decision, to answer the call or not. Then I laughed at myself. Of course I would call back. Curiosity practically demanded it. Harlena Collins had been my girlfriend from the day we met in 8th grade until midway through my senior year of college. It had been decided in both of our families that we would get married when we graduated from college, and truth be told, both of our mothers were already planning the wedding. And then it all went downhill from there. It started out simple enough, and I'm sure if you've been to college and probably some high schools, you've encountered this. The teacher divided the class into groups and gave each group a project. Lena, I called Harlena Lena, had to meet with her group in the library to do research and plan the project. She had to interrupt a few dates with me to do this, and I didn't pay much attention to it because I was already going through the same thing in some of my classes. I remember that day well. It was a Wednesday, and Lena and I had a date to visit an art exhibit at a local gallery. I had absolutely no interest in art, but the artist was a friend of Lena's and we were going to stop by and support him. I got the call just as I was leaving class at 4 o'clock. Lena said she had to cut our date short because the group had to meet to work out some problems with their project. Since I was only going to the gallery to placate Lena, I decided to skip the event since Lena wasn't going there. I was sitting in the student union drinking a Coke and looking over class notes when my friend Artie came over to my table. There were no "what's up, buddy" or "what's up" questions. He simply said, "You've been friends with me for years, home. Have you ever known me to lie to you?" As far as I know, never. I hate this house, but I have to tell you, Harlena is leaving you. I've seen her 3 times with some big guy. I know about that. She's in a study group working on an assigned project. 2 at home isn't a study group. 2 is a couple, and the couple I was looking at was making out and playing tag with each other. When was that? Last Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Listen, I remembered that all 3 of those nights Lena was supposedly in the library with her band. Where did you see them? All 3 times at Angie's. Artie went to school on a scholarship and earned money washing dishes at Angie's restaurant and bar. Angie's restaurant was on the other side of town and in a neighborhood I was unlikely to visit casually. In fact, I had only been there twice in the last 4 years, and the last time was 2 years ago. I started packing up my books and said, "Thanks for the warning, Artie. So what are you gonna do?" Since the last 3 times you've seen her were the nights she was supposed to be with her group at the library, and since she just called and canceled on me again, I have an overwhelming urge to go see Angie. If they stick to their old practice, they won't get there until 7 at the earliest. The guy is big and looks like a badass. I'm driving to work, so if anything happens, I'll be there to watch your back. The drive to Angie's took half an hour, and once there I parked so I could see Angie's parking lot. It wasn't a long wait, and around 7 I saw a car pull up and Lena and some guy got out. He was a really big guy, maybe 6'4" and 220. I saw them kiss and then walk into the restaurant holding hands. The kiss and the hand-holding told me all I needed to know, and I was about to start the car and drive away, but at the last second I said, "Screw it," and got out of the car and headed toward the building. They were sitting in a booth and Lena had her back to me. I walked over to them and said, "Hi, Harlena. I see you're busy working on your project. It's funny, but it doesn't look much like a library to me." I always thought her face went pale was a figure of speech until I saw Harlena's face when she looked up at me. "Just out of curiosity, Harlena, how long have you been a cheating whore?" The guy said, "Hey, asshole, you can't talk to her like that. Get out of here before I get mad and kick you out of here." "Screw you, I'll talk to my ex-fiancé any way I want." The guy moved to leave the stall, and I grabbed the beer mug in front of him and splashed the beer in his face. His hands flew up to his face, and grasping the handle of the beer mug tightly, I hit him over the head with it. It knocked him off his feet and he slid down onto the seat. I know it wasn't very sporting of me, but he was 6'4" against my 5'11" and 220 against my 85, and I would have been deadly stupid to let him get out of the booth to where he could get to me. I turned to Lena and said, "I reserve the right for you to tell your moms why the wedding they planned won't happen. Don't you dare call me and give me some ridiculous bullshit about how things aren't what they seem and nothing means anything. I don't want to talk to you anymore. I hope you have a lousy life, Harlena." I turned away, waved my hand at Artie, and walked out of the restaurant. I saw her on campus but avoided her and never spoke to her again. Then 2 years later, her phone call came. A simple "call me," and curiosity compelled me to do it. But first I was going to grab a bite to eat, a large Jack and water to build up my strength. It was 8 o'clock when, thanks to the Jack, I finally felt ready to hear Harlena's voice. I dialed the number, and it rang 4 times before the receiver was picked up, and I heard it. "I wondered if you would call. Isn't caller ID wonderful?" "Why? You had to know curiosity would make me call." "Can we meet somewhere for a drink?" "Not tonight. I've already had more Jack than I should have." "Pick a time and place." For a few seconds I contemplated just hanging up and losing the number. A phone conversation was one thing, but a face-to-face meeting was quite another. But then curiosity took over. "Would Bud's Bar tomorrow at 6 be okay with you?" "That'll work. And Bob? Thanks." I hung up the phone and wondered if I'd done the right thing. Harlena was gone and buried in the past. Shouldn't I have left her there? I arrived at Bud's at 5:45, expecting to have at least one drink to bolster my strength for the upcoming meeting. But when I walked in, I saw that Harlena was already there. She looked as well as ever. She was the polar opposite of Gwen. Where Gwen was sultry, Lena, like Alice, was the fresh girl from the neighborhood backyard. As I approached the stall, she stood up to greet me. She extended her hand to me with the words, "Thank you for having me," and I took it for a brief shake. I sat down, and as soon as my ass was down in the seat, Tina appeared and placed a drink in front of me, and I looked back at the bar and saw Mike watching me. He gave me a thumbs up, and I acknowledged the gesture with a nod and a smile. I picked up my drink, took a sip, and asked, "So what's up, Harlena?" "I'm hoping to find something I've lost." "And what might that be?" "You. I felt really bad the last 2 years, Bob, and it's all because you weren't around. I've missed you a lot. I know it's my fault, but there's a hole in my life where you used to be, and I want you to come back and fill that hole." I sat in silence, taking an occasional sip of my drink. She apparently couldn't stand the silence and continued to speak. "I know I hurt you, Bob, and I'm sorry for that. I never meant to hurt you, but honestly, I didn't think you'd find out. I just needed to get some things out of my head before we graduated and started living together. Maybe I should have said it outright, but I was afraid you'd take it the wrong way. No, that's not true. I knew how you'd take it, and I was afraid I'd lose you." I stayed silent and sipped my drink. She was probably waiting for me to say something or ask questions, and my silence was making her nervous. She turned away from me, sipped from her glass, and then said, "I just wanted to know what other guys are like, what they like and don't like, how they interact with girls and other guys, that sort of thing. I didn't want to replace you, but I was curious. I was happy with you, but I was curious. I never found anyone who could even come close to taking your place. I've dated 24 guys in the last 2 years, but none of them could fill the void you left when you dumped me. I'm not even close to leaving you behind. I don't know if you know this, but I call your mom every couple of weeks to ask how you're doing." I didn't know that. For weeks after my breakup with Harlena, my mom kept demanding that I sit down and talk to Harlena. "You're supposed to be together, Bobby, and everyone knows it." I finally told her that if she ever mentioned Harlena again, I would stop coming home to visit. She must have understood what I meant because she never brought up Harlan again. Sitting across from Lena and listening to her, I tried to separate the truth from the lies. The fact that she was sitting across from me and telling me her story was proof enough, at least to me, of the depth of her feelings for me. But I had no doubt that she was also lying to me. I believed it, but I had no proof, only memories of our time together. I still didn't say a word, and I didn't know how Lena would take my silence. She took a deep breath and then said, "I have no more curiosity, and I want to give Bob back what we had. Think about it, please. You have my number." Throwing me one last long look, she got up and left me with questions I doubted I'd get honest answers to, even if I asked them. But one of the things she said was memorable. "I have no more curiosity." And if that was true, could I take my chances? I didn't know, but I knew I would think about it. When I got home, there were 2 messages on the recorder from Gwen, and both were the same. "Please call me as soon as you get this message, Bob." I wondered why she hadn't called me on my cell phone. I pulled it out of its case and saw that it was turned off. I didn't remember turning it off. I tried to turn it back on and saw that it had turned off due to a dead battery. I put the phone in the charger, contemplating calling Gwen and getting it over with. I decided we should just do it and get it over with. I dialed her number, but the call went to voicemail. She was probably out with some guy and didn't want to be disturbed, I thought. And that was also a sign that I shouldn't call her. As I fell asleep, I thought about Lena. In the morning, I showered, shaved, took my phone off the charger, and headed to work. I stopped and had breakfast at the Village Inn, and when I got to work, I was in a pretty good mood. That is, I was in a pretty good mood until Lois, Gwen's replacement, handed me a stack of message sheets and said, "Please get her away from me, Bob." And then I looked through the sheets and saw that 2/3 of them were from Gwen, and most of them read, "Call me as soon as you can." I picked up the office phone and called Gwen's cell phone. She answered on the 3rd ring and said, "I'm at work. I can't talk right now. Call me tonight. Bye." And hung up. I looked at the phone in my hand and thought, how I tried to call as soon as I could. I had a very busy day, and when it was over, I picked up the phone and called. Not to Gwen, but to Harlena. I asked her if she wanted to have dinner with me, and she said yes. She gave me her address, and as I was getting in the car, my phone beeped. The screen popped up that Gwen was calling, and I transferred the call to voicemail. I had a quiet dinner with Harlena, and the evening went well enough that I asked her if she wanted to go out with me on Friday. She agreed, and when I brought her home, tried to drag me inside for a drink. Remembering the old Lena, I was tempted but said, "It's too early for that, Lena. It'll take me a while before I'm ready for it." And then I didn't add that I wanted to make sure she was really out of curiosity before I decided to do it again. I turned my phone off while I walked with Lena, and as I walked to my car after walking Lena to the door, I turned it back on. There were two messages from Gwen. I looked at the clock and saw that it was a little after 11. She said she wanted me to call as soon as possible, so I dialed her number and she answered as if she had just woken up. "Bob, do you even know what time it is?" "You wanted me to call, so I did. This is actually my third call today. The first one went to voicemail and you didn't answer the second one." "Why didn't you call again, at least a little earlier?" "Because I had a date, and it wouldn't have been nice to call you. Not to mention it would have been bad form to call you while I was with her." "You had a date? With a girl?" "Yes, Gwen, with a girl. I thought you knew I don't like guys." "But a date with a girl? I thought Bob and I were on to something good." "I thought so too, Gwen, until I saw you holding hands with that guy at Angie's the night you blew off your date with me because you had to stay late at work. And until you try it, I won't believe it was just a quick bite before rushing off to work." "Angelo's is across town from the Fisher Building where you work. There are 2 restaurants in the Fisher Building and at least 6 other establishments within a 3-block radius of it, so if you needed to break away for your lunch break, you didn't have to drive across town to do it. Sorry to wake you up. Goodbye." I cut the connection and immediately the phone rang. I realized from the screen that it was Gwen, but I wasn't in the mood to talk any further, so I disconnected the phone. When I got home, I saw the red light blinking on the answering machine. Without even checking the messages, I turned off the phone and answering machine and went to bed. When I got to work in the morning, I told Lois to tell Gwen if she called that she had been ordered not to take any messages from Gwen, and if she persisted in calling, Lois should hang up. It might be the coward's way out, but so what? I spent a quiet evening at home. Quiet because my cell phone was off and I didn't plug it in. I watched TV for a bit, then turned it off and picked up the book I was reading. When I got to work, Lois smiled at me and said she stopped calling. The day went by quickly, and when I got home from work, I picked up Lena, and we went out to dinner. After eating, we went to the pit for drinks and dancing. When I drove Lena home, we were in high spirits, and I followed her into the house when she asked me to come in for the night. She sat me down on the couch and went into the kitchen to make drinks. Lena smiled at my reaction, set the drinks on the side table and said, "This way to the bedroom, lover." We made our way to the bedroom and got down to business. When I finally got back to my apartment on Sunday night, I was so exhausted that I fell asleep as soon as my head touched the pillow. The next 2 weeks went pretty much the same. Work and Lena took up most of my time. I woke up in Lena's bed 2 or 3 times a week, and she woke up in mine 2 or 3 times a week. And Gwen stopped calling, but she didn't stop trying to get to me. Twice she waited for me in the parking lot at work, and both times I saw her exit through the loading dock first, walk down the street to the bar, and catch a cab to take me home. One time I saw her parked outside my apartment on my way home from work, but managed to turn around before she saw me and headed for the sports bar I sometimes went to. Lena was very insistent that we move in together, but I was hesitant to take such a big step, and there were several reasons for that. One was that I couldn't convince myself that Lena's curiosity list had all the items on it. And then there was Gwen. I'd always been honest with myself. I still had feelings for her, and I just couldn't get into a permanent relationship with Lena, or anyone else, while I still had the feelings I had for Gwen. It sounds silly, and I knew it. I always thought that Gwen was beyond me, and that a permanent relationship with her couldn't last. I'd always thought she was too woman for me, or maybe I wasn't man enough for her, but despite those feelings, I still spent an awful lot of time thinking about her. Even considering the reason I distanced myself from her, she still clung to me. Apparently, Gwen had finally decided that getting to me was impossible. After a few weeks passed and I didn't see her around, her influence on me waned. As Gwen faded away, Lena and I grew stronger and stronger, and I finally agreed to have her move in with me. The next 3 months passed in Lena's attempts to push me to make the final move and put the ring on her finger. I hesitated, right up until the night I caught her in bed with another idiot. It was Tuesday, and I was leaving my apartment for the airport to catch a flight to Chicago, where I was scheduled to attend a 3-day meeting on how to handle my company's takeover of one of our biggest competitors. I was sitting in the boarding area when my cell phone beeped. It was my boss informing me that the meeting had to be postponed for a week due to the death of the owner of the company we were taking over. I called Lena to let her know about the change of plans, but she was apparently in a meeting or something and the call went to voicemail. No big deal. She'll get the message within the day. I went to work and worked all day and then headed home. When I got home, I saw Lena's car in the parking lot and smiled, expecting her to have dinner ready for me when I arrived. There was nothing hot on the stove, but from the sounds coming from the bedroom, something was going on in there. I went to the door and peeked inside. Lena was having fun with some asshole. Apparently, she hadn't checked the messages on her phone during the day. Seeing Lena's purse on the kitchen table, I walked over to it and looked inside. Her phone was lying there. I checked it and saw that it had my message on it. I walked back to the bedroom door, selected speakerphone, and pressed the right buttons on her phone so Lena and her buried boyfriend could be heard. Hi, sweet dumpling. My appointment has been canceled and I'll be home at the usual time tonight. Love you. Bye. Lena and the boyfriend turned toward the bedroom door and saw me. They weren't the only ones surprised. Imagine my surprise when I saw that the guy entertaining Lena was the same guy she was with when I broke up with her. I only shook my head in disgust and said, I'm going to be away for a while, Harlena. Maybe 2 or 3 hours, and when I come back, I want you and all your things gone. And it goes without saying that I never want to see or talk to your sorry ass again. I turned and walked out of the apartment. I returned 3 hours later, but Harlena and all of her things were already gone. It took me a while to get over Lena, but not that long considering I was always doubtful when it came to her. I got promoted at work, and that entailed a lot of business trips. I wasn't home much for the next 2 months as I settled into my new job. Eventually, I was able to get my work organized so that I was always home by Thursday evening. The first weekend, I decided to go out for dinner and drinks. It was a Friday night, and after dinner at Tricocci's, I decided to go to Buckskin's to have a drink or two and listen to some country western music. Dawson James's band was playing that night. They were pretty good, although somewhat predictable. If you heard them once, you knew exactly what songs were going to be played and in what order. They never varied. Even the supposed ad-libs were the same. Not once in the dozen or so times I heard them did they change. Still, it was good music for dancing. There were a few unaccompanied ladies there that evening, but I didn't feel like playing the game, so I limited myself to line dancing. I had been there for about an hour, had just finished the cowboy cha-cha-cha-cha-cha, and was sitting on my bar stool sipping a PBR when a familiar voice said, "Hello, stranger." I turned around and saw Gwen standing there. She was as stunningly beautiful as ever. As I admired her, she said, "I just came in here with a couple friends and saw you sitting here. Would you like to join us? I wouldn't want to intrude on your evening. And you won't be interfering. The three of us could use a decent dancing partner. I seem to recall that you know how to keep your cool." When she first said she was out with friends, I assumed she was with a guy, and there was no way I wanted to see her with another man. Stupid of me, and I knew it. I couldn't have her, but I couldn't bear to see her with anyone else. The three of us could use a decent dance partner. Everything changed. 3 women I could handle, in terms of dancing. All right. I followed her to the table where she introduced me to Sarah and Stacy. I had a great time getting to know the girls and taking turns dancing with them. I tied up at midnight, although Stacy asked me to stay a little longer. I cheated a little and told her that I usually stayed until closing time, but I had things to do early in the morning and needed to get home and get some rest. I didn't really have anything to do early in the morning. The truth was that being around Gwen bored me. Most of the dances I danced with her were the kind that didn't lend themselves to conversation. You can't talk much while dancing an Eastern swing or a Texas two-step. I danced all the slow dances with Sarah and Stacy, but the booze I consumed both before and after joining this trio put me in the mood to ask Gwen out. Or gave me the courage to. The problem was that I remembered why I'd stopped dating her, and deep inside me a voice boomed out, "Don't make us suffer again." I decided I had better leave the bar before I did. As I was about to leave, Sarah said, "We are usually here on Fridays, and while I can't speak for others, I enjoyed dancing with you and would like to do it again." "I second that motion," Stacy said, and I was amazed that Gwen didn't say anything. I smiled and said, "I really enjoyed my night with you ladies, and I'd really like to do it again, so maybe you'll see me here again." And I meant just about everything. I enjoyed it with them. and I'd really like to do it again, but it's unlikely to happen. Not unless Gwen was there. That was the sticking point. I wanted to be with her. I wanted her around. But I knew that if I let it happen, I'd be hurt again. I'd spent the weekend alone and hadn't done anything special, and work had hardly distracted me during the week. But the closer Friday got, the more I thought about going to the Buckskins. I remembered that Sarah had said they were usually there on Friday. To me, that meant that they might not be there this coming Friday. Or there might only be one or two there, and maybe, just maybe, that one or two wouldn't be Gwen. When I flew home from Atlanta on Thursday, I had already made the decision to go to Buckskins on Friday. And if Gwen was going to be there, so what? I had proven the previous Friday that I had enough common sense to go before I did something stupid, like letting Gwen get her claws into me again. Just watch your alcohol consumption and get the hell out of Dodge if you start thinking about hitting on Gwen, is what I told myself. I arrived at Buckskins at 7 and saw that the Carlos Washington Band was playing that night. It was one of my favorite local bands, so I expected to be in for a good night. As soon as I entered the venue, I saw Sarah sitting alone at a table. She saw me at the same moment and waved for me to join her. When I sat down, she said, "Thank God you're here. Maybe now those assholes will stop coming here and bothering me." "I thought that's what you were here for." "What do you mean?" "You come here to enjoy the music and dance, and since you're alone, guys will come up to you and ask you to dance." "That's true. But a lot of guys are regulars here now, and are only interested in finding a woman to have fun in the parking lot. And so far, these freaks are the only ones who fit." "You're safe with me. I don't do parking lots. I need a bed." When I said that, her face took on a sour expression, so I quickly said, "I was just kidding, honey. You don't have to worry about me." Her face brightened, and then the waitress came over and took my order. I ordered another one for Sarah. The band wasn't playing yet, but there was music coming from the bar's sound system and a few couples dancing on the floor, so I asked Sarah if she wanted to dance. She agreed, and we walked out onto the parquet. It was a waltz, and as I hugged her, I wondered if she would accept a date, so I decided to ask her out for the rest of the evening. We stayed on the parquet for 2 numbers, and as I escorted her to our table, I noticed 3 other ladies I had danced with on previous trips to Buckskins. 2 of them had been friends with benefits at one time or another, and one had almost achieved that status. Fortunately, they decided to end it, and I found it easier to be around them when I came for a drink, dance, or just music. And some nights they even danced with me. And then I was just about to order another round for me and Sarah when she suddenly said, "Oh, great, they made it in time." I turned around and saw Gwen and Stacy heading our way. Oh well, I knew this could happen, and all it meant to me was that I would drink less and leave earlier than I had planned. It also meant that I wouldn't be able to ask Sarah out. At least not this evening. The band started playing, and for the next hour I took turns dancing with all 3 of them. And like the previous Friday, all of my dances with Gwen were such that conversation didn't arise. Sarah and Stacy got up to go to the bathroom, and I was left to sit alone with Gwen. The group was on break, so the noise level was down. I sat looking around the room for something that would allow me to avoid looking at Gwen when she said, "What's the matter, Bob? Did the cat bite your tongue?" "Not really. I just don't know what to say." "You could say you missed me. Or would that be a lie?" "No, Gwen, that wouldn't be a lie." "Then why haven't I heard from you?" "I didn't see the point of it." "Why, Bob? I thought we had something." "How come?" "You know why, Gwen. I told you why the last time you and I talked." "Yes, I remember that late-night call, but I don't understand why you refused to give me an explanation. You wouldn't return my calls, and you always avoided me when I looked for you. I remember telling you that I thought we were onto something good, and I remember you responding that you thought so too. If you thought that, weren't you at least a little curious as to why I ended up where I did? And why I was there with him? Didn't you at least want to know?" "No, Gwen. I didn't want to know. You apparently have no idea how fragile a man's ego is. The last thing I wanted to hear was that you were different because of some flaw of mine. Because I didn't live up to your standards. I never really thought that, but the last thing I wanted to hear from you was that. So I acted like a coward and didn't let you tell me that." "You're that insecure?" I was quiet for a few seconds and then said, looking down at the table, "Yeah, I guess I am. I've only really cared about 2 women in my life, and both of them did everything they could with me. Both dated other guys and kept it from me. Both made me doubt myself. What wasn't in me that made them seek out others? Both of them. Not one, but both. So yes, Gwen, I am that insecure. I suppose one of those two is me? I nodded in agreement, and she said, I don't know about the other one, but I didn't do to you what you're assuming. If you just let me talk to you, I could have cleared things up. I wasn't seeing another guy because I thought you were missing something. I didn't actually have another guy, at least in that sense of the word. The man you saw me with was my brother Dave. He flew in from Dallas to meet with a client. I had to work late that night, but he called me at work when he finished his business and invited me to have dinner with him at Angelo's restaurant. Angelo's restaurant was closer to the airport than the Fisher building, and he was afraid he'd miss his plane if he drove across town and then got stuck in traffic on the way back to the airport. I met up with him, we had dinner together, and then I went back to work and he went to the airport to catch his flight to Dallas. I mulled over her words and pondered what I was going to say when Sarah and Stacy came back from the bathroom. I wasn't going to talk about personal things in front of those two, so I didn't say anything to Gwen about what she had just told me. And then the evening got weird. The group came back from break just as the two girls sat down at the table, and Carlos said, I see my old friend Bob Talbot is here tonight, and our next number is his favorite. We haven't performed it in a while, but since it's here, we'll get it out, dust it off, and give it a try. I knew what he was going to play, and it was a great Eastern swing song. I was trying to decide which of the three to ask to dance. When the first notes of Ride Cowboy Ride came on, a hand came down on my shoulder and a voice said, Get off your ass, Bobby, this is our song. I turned around and saw Melanie Murphy standing there. Mel was one of my former girlfriends, and Ride Cowboy Ride was indeed our song. It was the song that brought us together back in the day. If any of the three of us at the table had been on a date with me, I would have said, No thanks, Mel. But I wasn't attached to anyone at the table, so I got up and Mel and I headed to the dance floor. Mel and I looked good together, plus we had entered dance contests at the Coach House Inn a few years ago. When the song ended, Mel kissed me on the cheek and said, Call me. I still have the same number. Never. When I returned to the table, all three women were looking at me, and only Sarah voiced the question that was on all their faces. Is this our song, Bobby? You just have to tell us the story behind it. I thought for a few seconds and then told them the story. I met Mel on Saturday night at the old Coach House Inn. The band playing there tonight is the same band that was there that night. I was alone that night, and Mel was sitting at a table with three of her girlfriends. Her three table mates were on the dance floor, and she was sitting there watching. From the way she moved in her chair and the way her fingers tapped the table, I knew she wanted to be there too. I didn't come to dance, just to drink and listen to music. I was the only available guy in the joint that night, and I could see that she really wanted to go out on the parquet, so I got up from my bar stool, walked over, and invited her. We walked out onto the parquet just as the tune ended. The band had been playing for quite some time, and I figured it was time for them to take a break. Mel must have thought so too, because she had a look of great disappointment on her face. We were surprised when the band started Cowboy Ride. Mel smiled, and when I asked her if she knew Eastern Swing, she said yes, and we continued the performance. When the song ended, the band took a break. I walked Mel to her table, and on the way out she said, That was fun. I hope they perform that number again tonight. When we got to her table, she introduced me to her friends, and then I excused myself and went to the restroom. When I came out of the restroom, I asked the bartender where the band was taking a break. I went there, introduced myself to Carlos, told him what Mel had said, and then offered him $50 if he would play for her again. He turned down the money and said he would gladly do it for someone who liked his music. He told me that the song wouldn't be in the next set because it would be too soon after the first time, but if we stayed for the next set, he would play it again. I went back and told Mel what Carlos had told me, and I could see that she was disappointed, and I asked her why. She replied that she was out riding with some friends and they were just about to leave. I told her there was no problem and that I would take her home. Her friends left and I joined her at the table, and when Carlos played Ride again, we got up and danced to it. There are 5 or 6 pretty decent country western bands in the area, and they rotate through the C&W bars in the neighborhood. After we finished dancing, Mel approached Carlos and asked where he was going to play next. On the way back to her house, she told me where he was playing next weekend and asked me to drive her there. Since this was the first time a girl had ever asked me out, I told her I would love to do it. The following Friday, when we arrived at the bar where he was performing, he recognized us and played the song Ride Cowboy Ride 3 times during the evening. The next weekend when we came in, he saw us, and at the beginning of his next set, he said, "This is for Bob and Mel," and started the ride. We followed him for 2 months, and he always performed Ride for us at least twice. So, yeah, I guess Ride Cowboy Ride could be considered our song. When I finished, I could see that they were expecting something more, but I didn't know what exactly. Stacy enlightened me. And then what happened? I don't understand your question. No surprise there. You're a typical ignorant male. What happened between you and Mel? Nothing. We were just friends. Good friends who had a good time dancing. We even entered a few dance contests and did pretty good. Not bad? Sarah asked. What does that mean? Second place and 2 third places. I could tell by the look on their faces that they thought there was more to my and Mel's relationship than that, and they were right, of course, but they didn't care. For the next hour, we sat, drank, snacked, listened to music, and danced. I danced with all 3 of them, and even though Stacy said I was clueless, I understood perfectly the signals both she and Sarah were sending me on the dance floor. It was obvious from the way they moved towards me and pressed up against me that they both wanted me to make a move. I had already considered asking Sarah out, but with all 3 of them around, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I wouldn't mind a date with Stacy either, but I need a situation where I'm alone with them before I ask them out. Was I thinking about Gwen? No, I hadn't. I still thought she was out of my league, and I couldn't imagine getting burned. The band came back from break, and Carlos, seeing Mel and I on the floor, apparently decided it was going to be like old times and started the set with Ride Cowboy Ride. Gwen stood up, took my hand, and said, "This may have once been that woman's song and your song, but tonight I'm going to make it our song." She literally pulled me out of my chair and dragged me to the dance floor. There I got into the groove, and Gwen and I moved beautifully together. When the dance was over, she said, "That was fun. We need to find out where it is next week so we can do it again." When we got back to the table, I was still trying to pull myself together. No sooner had I sat down than Gwen said to her 2 friends, "I know both of you sluts would like to claw your way into him, but you can forget it. I told you both about the relationship I had with him, and I intend to get him back into that relationship, even if I have to drag him kicking and screaming all the way." Then she turned to me and said, "Come on, cowboy. You have to take me home." I was so surprised at what was happening that I just stood still until Gwen took my hand and led me out the front door. By the time I came to my senses, we were already at my car. I started to say something, but Gwen covered my mouth with her hand and said, "Not now. Wait until we get in the car." We got in the car and she said, "It was obvious you weren't going to get off and make a move, so I decided I had to do it." By then I was at the parking lot exit and turned on my blinkers to turn right. Gwen asked, "What are you doing?" "Taking you home." "Turn left." "Why?" "The road to your house is that way." And I pointed to the right. "Right, but the road to your house is that way." And she pointed left. "To my house? Why do you want to go to my house?" "Stacy said you were clueless, but she clearly underestimated how much." She moved closer to me. "I should have done it sooner and locked you in, but I took my time because I didn't want to scare you off. Said, you need to hurry up and get us back to your house so I can get busy with your recovery." We got home and got busy with Atme. Sunday night, I drove Gwen home, and she wanted me to come over to her place, but I refused. I needed to get some rest if I was going to be perfectly fine at work on Monday. So that's how it started. We'd go out a couple times a week, and one of those dates was always on a Friday, and every Friday we'd go to some lounge or bar where Carlos Washington was performing. He always performed Ride Cowboy Ride for us at least twice, and our dates usually ended up in my bedroom or Gwen's bedroom. 6 months passed, and I was quite happy with my life, but I soon discovered that I was the only one who was happy with everything. It was Tuesday evening, and I was having dinner at Gwen's. I was shoveling a forkful of mashed potatoes into my mouth when Gwen said, "Don't make any plans for us this weekend." I finished what was in my mouth and asked, "Why? What's wrong?" "We're going to spend the weekend at my parents' house, and my brother Dave is flying in from Dallas." "Why would we want to do that?" "My family wants to meet my future husband." "Your future husband? What do I have to lose?" "Apparently, you lack the common sense to ask me to marry you. And since you'll probably never pull your head out of your ass and do it, I'm taking matters into my own hands. We'll spend the weekend with my family, and my dad will shake your hand, welcome you to the family, and then tell you that if you hurt his girl, he'll hunt you down and maim you." My mom will hug you, tell you how many grandchildren she wants, and then start planning the wedding. My brother Dave will shake your hand and then ask you how you feel about hunting, fishing, and NASCAR. My sister will hug you and kiss you and try to steal you away from me, and I'll cut your balls off with a dull knife if you don't shut her up. You already know Tony and Alice, so they'll probably leave you alone. My grandparents will just stand in the background and shake their heads, though my grandfather will probably try to catch you alone and tell you to run. For that reason, I'll probably spend most of my time keeping him away from you. Do I have a say in this? Of course you do. There are a few things you can say, and it might be a good idea to start practicing them. They are, yes, darling. Whatever you want, darling. As you wish, my love. Of course, darling. And the always popular, your wish is my command, my love. Has it ever occurred to you that the reason I haven't asked you to marry me is because I don't want to get married? The smile disappeared from her face and she asked, You don't want to marry me? Desire has nothing to do with it. I'm afraid to marry you. And then I proceeded to give her my thoughts and feelings on the matter. She sat and listened to it all pour out to me, and when I had finished, she shook her head negatively and said, Aren't you selling yourself? What makes you think I'm not right for you? It's not just my looks, she said, and seeing the look on my face, she added, Isn't it? Spill it, Bobby, spill it. There's nothing special about me, Gwen. In decent physical shape, not very good looking, but not too bad either. I have nothing to offer a woman like you. On the other hand, men are drawn to you like flies to sugar and honey. Sooner or later, someone who has all the things I lack will get your attention and you'll be gone. I don't want to be hurt when that happens. Unreal. Unreal, for crying out loud. Have you ever thought about how the things you think you're missing are things I don't care about? I know what I look like, Bobby. I've had men and boys pining for me since I was 12, and in the years since, hundreds have made attempts on me. Some of them were prettier than you, some richer than you, and, though you may hate to hear it, some were smarter than you. But none of them, Bobby, none of them had something in them that made me want to make them a permanent part of my life. You have that, Bobby. It took me a while to realize it, but you have it. I can't describe that feeling that says, hold on to it, don't let it go. What it boils down to, Bobby, is that you either want me or you don't. I want you, but, as they say, it takes two to tango. If you want me, you gotta get your ass up and do what needs to be done. As they say on the farm, it's time to tighten the screws. How do you become Bobby? For the most curious, 1. Her mother wanted 4, so she started planning a wedding right away. 2. Her brother learned that hunting and fishing was in vogue, but NASCAR was not. 3. I cut off access to her sister Eileen. And 4. 9 years went by without her father tracking me down and hurting me. Oh, lest I forget, her grandfather left me alone and told me to run, but I didn't, and I'm damn glad I didn't. The song Ride Cowboy Ride is still our song, and Carlos sang it 4 times at our wedding reception. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.